Hello, I'd like to welcome you to this interview. Today we're going to welcome Surabhi Pandit, who's a social worker by training, but also a senior program officer at the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. And today Surabhi is going to talk to us a little bit about the role of nonprofits and philanthropy foundations in policy making. So thanks, Surabhi, so much for joining us today to talk about this important issue.
Thanks for having me.
So much of social welfare policy is connected to state and national governments. And so we've been talking in this MOOC a lot about kind of the role that the federal policy has played and a lesser extent, but still the role of the states. But I think it's also really important to talk about the importance of nonprofits and foundations. And we know historically that nonprofits and foundations have played a role, religious institutions included, in both the provision of social welfare, but also in helping to develop and leverage social policy work. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, from your own experience and in your own work, thinking about the role of nonprofits and foundations in supporting social welfare services and policies.
Sure. I think that nonprofits are well positioned to provide innovative solutions to societal challenges. So I've often worked with nonprofits who are making recommendations to city, state, federal government units, and foundations can provide funding to help nonprofits make a case for something. And once that case has been built, we can see entire systems shift in their policy.
Right, so really helping to kind of identify local solutions or work with local partners to kind of raise up important issues and develop innovative strategies, test them out. Great. So tell me a little bit about, so in your own work as a program officer, I should have probably started here, but can you tell me a little bit about kind of the work that you do as a program officer and a little bit about the foundation that you
Sure.
that
I'll
you
start
work
with
for?
what the foundation does.
Okay.
So Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. So by definition, Community Foundation, we serve a particular geographic area. So we serve 7 counties of Southeast Michigan, and we engage a wide collection of supporters. So our donors, not just one person, but several individuals, businesses, and other foundations. And we're working to build a permanent endowment. And we make about $60 million in grants each year. That will vary year by year across varied program areas. So arts and culture, human services, health, education, environment, just a little bit about everything that represents the community. So in my work as a program officer, I'm helping nonprofits build strong applications, help them understand how to access funding, and kind of getting them through the application process and building connections across the networks. Oftentimes we get several nonprofits working on similar issue areas coming in, and with limited resources, it's helpful for us from our vantage point to be able to help connect them with each other to build collaborative proposals as well.
Great. So you can also be kind of a convener of groups that are working on allied interests.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you mentioned community foundations as a type of foundation, and I'm wondering if it would be helpful for us to kind of just step back and talk about the landscape of foundations broadly. So in terms of the different types of foundations that there are, and so community foundations versus kind of
an independent foundation,
or family foundations.
So, so like I said, with community foundations, we don't have a single donor. We have multiple donors kind of across all different sectors. And so whereas other foundations that you might think of, some of the larger ones in the world, that may be based off of an individual's wealth. So that person had some industry, some business, and that the philanthropic arm of that is an independent foundation. So there's not necessarily donors to that foundation, but it was a single donor at some point in time, and the endowment has built. With the Community Foundation, we continually raise money as we're putting money back into the community. So we are also working to build a permanent endowment, a permanent source of funding to exist in perpetuity. But while we're doing that, we're also raising money every day.
So really the idea of like by the community for the community with the community.
Exactly, which is why we exist to represent all types of issue areas as well. We're representing everybody in the community. That's what we're meant to do. When some years when we have a special initiative where we're raising money to go do something in a particular area, you might see more targeted grant making towards that. But otherwise, we're doing a little bit of everything all year round.
So what are some of the kind of areas that the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan in particular focuses on, or the program areas?
Yeah, so some of the larger projects that are happening right now, entrepreneurship and building an entrepreneurial ecosystem in Southeast Michigan. We're supporting a lot of the early childhood work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan now. Greenway, so environmental infrastructure, has been a big part of our work as well. And I would say that you never know what can happen at a community foundation. So there might be things in the works right now that I'm not even yet sure about that might come about in a couple of years.
It makes it really interesting when you think about the role of foundations to policy making, the difference from a community vantage point where you're really kind of identifying or kind of hearing from the community about issues versus having kind of a particular perspective on wanting to see things happen. That makes it interesting. So kind of jumping from that to think about some of the ways that the Community Foundation, for example, you've seen it impact kind of local policy or even state policy, or kind of how it's been affected and helping to affect that.
Sure. I think I can tell this story a little bit better by talking about a particular grantee that will help illustrate this story. So there's one organization that we work with that works with different sectors to provide supportive housing all over the country, but this is specifically in Michigan. And in their work, they were realizing that somehow the organizations that were coming together to form applications to access state funding were not competitive. So they would get to that level, and then these organizations just weren't accessing this funding. The funding was untouched year after year. And so what they did was they simultaneously worked with the city to help develop comprehensive benchmarks to evaluate applications so that there was one level of kind of quality control before it got to the state level, and that they could be in agreement on which application they were putting forward or which few applications. And then they were also working with those same organizations to provide technical assistance to strengthen overall applications. So we provided funding to help them build out that system. And hopefully what it's resulted in, so we're kind of in the middle of this right now. So what we're hoping to see, and what the organization that we funded is hoping to see, is that now these thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of untapped state money will now be accessible to these organizations and these communities. And if this model works, it can be replicable across the country. So it may not immediately come off and come to look like a policy change, but it's definitely incremental, and it's something that a nonprofit through their work noticed was a problem in the system. And so what they're addressing now can hopefully impact several communities across the country.
That's great. So really as the foundation helping to kind of fund innovative ideas like this and kind of recognize some of the barriers or some of the places where there are challenges and help to use funding to address them.
Yeah, and I would say, this is something that the way we're structured, there are so many nonprofits in the region and we're unable, finite resources, I'll continue to talk about that, right? And so we're able to do something, but it's not like we can support the same organization every year indefinitely. But this was a unique time for them that we can help them build this case to now city and state, and maybe it'll get to a federal level at some point. And now the funding that was already there is being made more accessible than it was before. So we were just kind of there at the right time to help them move along an issue that they had seen for so long.
Yeah, that's great. I also wonder about, you talked about the role of convenings, and I know that that's also something that that foundations are uniquely poised to do, kind of being able to be connected to lots of nonprofits. And I'm wondering if you have an example of a convening around an issue that really helped at least start to kind of raise up awareness about the issue, or help to identify some of the potential issues or solutions that could be made at the policy level.
Sure. I think I have an answer to this question. So I would say a couple of years ago, we were noticing that there were several organizations across the region applying for support for literacy programs. So this was youth literacy, adult literacy, kind of across the spectrum. And every program had a wait list. And this was thinking about kind of literacy both in kind of English language learning as well, but overall literacy. And it was a trend. Every quarter we do grant making quarterly, and every quarter there was so many applications, and none of them were duplicating populations. So they weren't competing with each other, and they were everywhere. And so in that moment, we thought, well, do they all know that the others exist? Does somebody in St. Clair know that somebody in Detroit is working to alleviate a similar issue or challenge in the community? So after those grants were made, we brought them all together at the foundation to just talk about what are you working on? What are your challenges? What is your agenda? What are you trying to advance? And just that conversation, I mean, you could see people across the room. You could see a lot of minds churning to figure out how can they work more in sync and collaboratively. And maybe there are opportunities for some of them to go to other funding sources collaboratively instead of going individually. And in that case, sometimes that offers funders an opportunity to do something bigger if it's a group of groups coming together. So that was it was relatively small in the grand scheme of how many convenings that we do all year round, but it was a moment in time that we recognized something, and from our vantage point, we would have been the only ones that would have seen it happen this way, and so we were able to invite people for that conversation.
It gives you a really unique perspective on community issues. So kind of jumping from there, thinking about then the importance, so you've kind of mentioned it a few times, but the importance of kind of non-governmental organizations and foundations, the importance of the role that they play in policy work. Why is it important for them to be involved in this system?
Sure. So nonprofit organizations are often representing the communities that a lot of social welfare policies are formed around. And with that voice, they're able to elevate the voice of the communities they serve, often marginalized, often underrepresented, who wouldn't otherwise be at the table for policy discussions, and they're able to take up space in those conversations.
Are there challenges that you see from your perspective working in a foundation in terms of kind of the potential promise, but also some of the limitations of foundations and policy work?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities, and it's great when we can participate in those opportunities. I think the challenge, and anyone at any foundation may tell you this, that there are finite resources for infinite need, right? There's always something that we could be doing more or better, right? And so I think that's a challenge, but it helps us also have to think creatively. And, we won't be the only ones out there being able to provide financial support for everything all the time. But are there ways we can help organizations, like the example I mentioned, tap into other funding sources or other opportunities? I think another thing about foundations is that we can offer a lot more than financial resources. We talked about the convener role. There are moments in time where we can just help put people in a room together, and that could be a solution too. So I think there are opportunities, but there are definitely challenges as well.
Have you had the opportunity to help lift up some of the issues? I know that that your foundation in particular also kind of networks with other foundations at the state and at the national level. So I suppose there's also the opportunity to kind of raise up local issues, not just through the nonprofits, but ways that you, through the foundation lens, can help raise the importance of issues and help potentially policymakers at different levels hear that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a part of several types of funder networks and affinity groups based on different issue areas. And we're often asked to join conversations specifically for that. Can you bring the Detroit or Southeast Michigan lens to this work? Or we know that you all have advanced this type of work. Can you help talk to our local government leaders to influence something there? So we're often being asked to join those conversations, and a lot of times we're hosting those conversations when we want experts from the field, from other parts of the country to help us inform our work as well.
So thinking about, just shifting gears slightly, but talking about yourself. So you have a social work background, and a lot of times I think people, hopefully through the MOOC, they're realizing the importance of the relationship between social work and policy, but they don't always think about social workers and foundations. And so I'm wondering about, from your own perspective, about the importance of being a social worker. What are the kinds of lenses that you bring both to your work in the foundation and then also as it relates to this issue about foundations impacting policy?
Yeah, I'm biased, right? I have a social work background, but there's a direct pipeline from the things that we learn in school, at the School of Social Work, in social work practice, in our field placements, the principles that our work is founded on, we're talking about equity, social justice, intersectional identities. All of that matters when you're thinking about impacting a system. So I think of philanthropy as kind of macro social work. And it's so important to bring those lenses when you're thinking about grant requests. I mean, that's a part of what we do, right? We talked about the range of activities that we're engaged in. But when I can read a proposal and think about all of those things while reading it, it definitely impacts the way I show up when I meet with the nonprofit and the types of questions that I ask, and the way I can navigate a conversation that I maybe otherwise couldn't if I weren't thinking about all of those things at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And also, we've been talking a lot, and you kind of raised it in the different examples you have given about the complex nature of these systems that social welfare policies are aimed to address, and that it's rarely kind of one thing, but that there's kind of a ripple effect. And so being able to see the different interconnections between nonprofits and the relationship between nonprofits and city government and other foundations, I think is also something that I think social workers are uniquely positioned to bring. So. So thinking about advice, so some of the people taking this MOOC are thinking about social work, but also thinking about engaging in the policy process. And I'm just wondering if you could give some of your own wisdom, thinking about advice you would give to others who are starting to engage in this
I mean, I think I would encourage others to think both about micro and macro policy change, and it's important to look internally concurrent to looking externally as we're trying to impact systems. So I'll give an example, relatively small, but I think it helps illustrate what I'm trying to get to. So in our grant application, we used to ask organizations to provide a statement or something on their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And through that, we were receiving kind of non-discriminatory hiring policy statements, which answered the question, but that didn't really tell the story. We realized we were asking the wrong question. So what we wanted to ask, what we now ask, is how is your organization, through what you're proposing here, proactively addressing these issues, these challenges in our community? And that was like, 2 sentences change, but that really impacted the way the questions were being answered. And I'd like to think how nonprofits were framing their proposals and what kind of pushed them to think a little bit as much as it pushed us to think. So while we're out here trying to, and we've talked about different issue areas that we're trying to impact systemically, there are things internally that we can do that are maybe relatively small that can also impact how the larger system gets looked at.
Yeah, and it's interesting to also kind of going back to thinking about the role of the foundation and through kind of having this particular lens to be really thinking around equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, but how a policy change or kind of a wording change of sorts, but with intention, how that can then in fact impact policies and practices, because now all the organizations that are interested in funding are going to have to be able to articulate that, so it creates that kind of ripple effect out, which is really, really powerful, and another role for where kind of non-governmental organizations and foundations can play, make a difference. So great. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us today, and thank you all for watching.